The security camera boxes sat in the hallway like promises of safety, their glossy packaging featuring smiling families and bold text that read, "Protect what matters most." David Mercer had spent 3 weekends researching the best home security system, reading reviews until his eyes burned, watching YouTube comparison videos until he could recite specifications in his sleep. After the break-in at the Hendersons' place down the street, he couldn't shake the image of strangers walking through his home, touching his family's things, breathing the same air where his children slept. "You're obsessing," Sarah had told him, not unkindly, as he added another camera to their online cart. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers from her 4th grade class, red pen moving in practiced loops across misspelled words and crooked numbers. "We have locks. We have neighbors. We have that motion light you installed last summer." The motion light that the Hendersons also had? She'd looked up then, pen pausing mid-correction. Something in his voice must have reached her, some frequency of genuine fear that cut through her practiced patience. After 18 years of marriage, she knew when to push back and when to let him have his projects. This was a letting go moment. "Fine. But you're installing them. I'm not spending another Saturday watching you argue with customer service." That had been 3 weeks ago. Now David stood in the living room, tablet in hand, watching the app cycle through 6 different camera feeds. Front door. Back door. Garage. Living room. Hallway. Kids' bedrooms. Though he'd promised Emma and Lucas those feeds would only be accessible to him and Sarah, and only in emergencies. Privacy mattered, even in a house full of family. The cameras were remarkable in their clarity. He could see individual blades of grass in the front yard feed, the slight sway of the oak tree's branches in the evening breeze. The night vision had been the selling point, full-color imaging even in complete darkness, none of that ghostly green-tinted footage from older systems. When he watched the playback from last night's test, he could make out the exact pattern of Sarah's pajamas as she'd walked through the living room at 2 a.m, insomnia driving her to the kitchen for warm milk and whatever audiobook she was currently drifting through. "It's a little creepy, Dad." Emma appeared in the hallway, 17 years old and perpetually unimpressed, her phone clutched like a talisman against parental oversight. "Like we're living in our own reality show." The Mercers, unauthorized, Lucas offered from the couch, where he was sprawled in that boneless way only 14-year-olds could manage. Season 1, Dad becomes Big Brother. David closed the app, slipping the tablet onto the coffee table. "Very funny. Both of you. I'll remember your mockery when I catch whoever's been stealing packages off our porch." "That was Amazon's fault," Emma said. "They kept marking things delivered when. And when I see anyone suspicious lurking around." "It's a cul-de-sac, Dad. The only people who lurk here are Mr. Patterson walking his emotional support chihuahua at midnight." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, that particular smile on her face that meant she was enjoying watching David get roasted by their children. "Leave your father alone. He's nesting." "I'm providing security." "You're nesting. It's very cute. Like a paranoid suburban sparrow." David opened his mouth to protest, but his phone buzzed. The app sending a notification. Motion detected, front door. He pulled up the feed automatically, that little spike of adrenaline that the system had trained into him over the past week. Every notification was potentially something. Every motion alert could be the vindication of his investment. It was a delivery truck. The driver was walking back to his vehicle, having left a package on their porch. David watched him go, watched the truck pull away, watched the empty street return to its evening stillness. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m. Dinner would be ready soon. Everything was exactly as it should be. He didn't think about the notification again that night. Didn't wonder why the camera had picked up the driver but not his actual approach, not the moment he'd stepped onto the porch. Didn't question why, when he scrubbed back through the footage later, there was a gap, just 3 seconds, barely noticeable, where the feed seemed to skip, the timestamp jumping from 6 hours 47 minutes and 22 seconds to 6 hours 47 minutes and 25 seconds. 3 seconds of nothing. Less time than it takes to blink. Meant nothing. Later, David would look back on that first night and try to identify the moment when everything changed. He'd scrubbed through footage for hours, searching for the precise second when their reality developed a crack. But there was no clear before and after, no dramatic shift that announced itself. Like most terrible things, it crept in gradually. It wore their faces. It learned their routines. It waited. The Mercers went to bed that night feeling safer than they had in months. 6 cameras watched over them, silent and vigilant, recording everything. Everything except what actually mattered. Sarah found it. She would tell herself later that she hadn't been looking for anything specific, that she'd simply been reviewing the footage out of curiosity, testing the system the way you might press on a loose tooth, not expecting pain, just checking. David had shown her the app basics. How to pull up live feeds, how to scrub through recordings, how to zoom and enhance and save clips. In case something happens when I'm at work, he'd said, and she'd nodded along, already knowing she'd probably never use it. But it was a Saturday morning. David had taken Lucas to basketball practice, and Emma was still unconscious in that teenager way that made Sarah both envious and concerned. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, grading papers, and found her attention drifting to her phone. The app icon seemed to pulse at her, though of course it wasn't doing anything of the sort. Just a quick look, she told herself. Just to see if the system had picked up anything interesting overnight. Maybe an owl on the fence post. Maybe a raccoon investigating the garbage cans. Small suburban wildlife dramas to break up the monotony of correcting spelling tests. She scrolled to the previous night's footage. Started at midnight, when the family had been long asleep. The house sat quiet and still in the camera's unblinking gaze. Living room empty. Hallway dark. Front door showing nothing but the porch light's warm circle against the pre-dawn darkness. She was about to close the app when she saw it. 3:17 a.m. Front door camera. Movement. She almost missed it, just a flicker at the edge of the frame like someone passing quickly out of view. Sarah frowned and scrubbed back. Watched again. The timestamp ticked forward. 3:16, 3:17, and there it was. A figure stepping onto the porch. Coming from somewhere off camera, moving with purpose toward the front door. The motion-activated light flickered on, illuminating. Sarah's finger paused on the screen. Her coffee grew cold beside her, forgotten. Was David. Or rather, it looked exactly like David. Same height. Same build. Same way of moving, that particular gait she'd watched for nearly 2 decades. He was wearing the clothes David had worn yesterday, the blue button-down she'd bought him for Father's Day, the khakis that needed ironing. He approached the front door like he owned the place. Like he lived there. Which of course he did. But David had been in bed at 3:17 a.m. She knew because she'd woken briefly around 3, insomnia nudging her toward consciousness, and she'd felt him beside her, the familiar warmth of his body, the soft rhythm of his breathing. She'd considered getting up for water but had drifted back to sleep instead. Sarah watched the figure that looked like her husband reach for the door handle. Watched him open the door. It wasn't locked, they never locked it once everyone was home, something David had lectured her about 100 times but never actually changed, and step inside. She switched to the hallway camera. Empty. The hallway sat dark and still, undisturbed. She scrubbed forward. Kept watching. Waited for the David that wasn't David to appear in the interior footage, to walk through their home in the middle of the night while the real David slept upstairs. Nothing. The hallway remained empty. The living room remained empty. Wherever the figure had gone after entering, the cameras hadn't caught it. Sarah switched back to the front door camera, scrubbed forward, looking for the moment when the figure left. It never left. She watched all the way until 6:30 a.m., when the real David appeared in the hallway footage, yawning, heading downstairs to start coffee. She watched him open the front door to get the newspaper, stepping outside in his bathrobe, completely unaware that, according to the footage, he'd already entered the house 3 hours earlier and never came back out. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this distantly, the way you notice details in dreams that don't quite make sense but feel important. The paper she'd been grading was covered in red ink now, abstract lines where her pen had kept moving after her attention had left. There had to be an explanation. A glitch in the system. Some kind of delay or loop in the recording. David had warned her that new technology sometimes had bugs, that the first few weeks might require troubleshooting. She should call him. Should show him this. The front door opened. Sarah dropped her phone, heart hammering, but it was just David, home from basketball practice, Lucas trailing behind him with sweaty hair and grass-stained knees. The Eagles got massacred, Lucas announced cheerfully, grabbing a Gatorade from the fridge. Coach says we need to work on fundamentals. I told him our fundamentals are fine, our everything else is the problem. David kissed Sarah's cheek, his lips warm and familiar, and she resisted the urge to pull away and examine his face, to look for some difference. Some sign that he was or wasn't the same person she'd watched enter their house at 3:17 in the morning. You okay? He asked, noticing something in her expression. You look pale. Just tired. The lie came easily. Didn't sleep well. You should take a nap. I'll start lunch. She nodded, gathering her papers, picking up her phone. The app was still open, still showing the front door camera, live now, the Saturday morning sun spilling across their porch. She closed it. She should tell him. Should show him the footage. Should sit down together and figure out what had happened, what had gone wrong with the recording. Instead, she went upstairs and lay down in their bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of her family moving through the house below her. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. Lucas arguing about lunch options. Emma finally emerging from her room, complaining about being woken up by noise. David laughing at something, that particular laugh she'd loved since college, warm and genuine and exactly right. Everything was exactly right. But she couldn't shake the image of him walking through their front door in the dark, wearing yesterday's clothes, entering a house where he was already asleep. She didn't sleep. She lay there for an hour, listening, and finally pulled up the app again. The footage was still there. She hadn't imagined it. 3:17 a.m., the figure on the porch, the door opening, the entry that led nowhere. Sarah saved the clip to her phone. Just in case. Just in case she needed to prove to herself later that this had really happened, that she hadn't dreamed it, that she wasn't losing her mind. Then she went back downstairs and joined her family for lunch. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as it should be. It happened again 3 nights later. This time Sarah was watching live. She hadn't told David about the footage. Had convinced herself in the daylight hours that there must be an explanation. A software bug. A recording error. Some kind of echo in the system that had captured old footage and timestamped it wrong. She'd almost deleted the clip from her phone, had hovered her finger over the trash icon a dozen times, but something stopped her. Some instinct that felt less like paranoia and more like self-preservation. So she hadn't slept well. Had found herself waking at 2 a.m., at 2:30, at 3 o'clock, each time reaching for her phone to check the app, to watch the cameras show nothing but empty rooms and quiet darkness. On the 4th night, she gave up pretending and set an alarm for 3:10 a.m. David stirred beside her when it went off, mumbling something about work. She told him it was nothing, just her phone acting up, and he subsided back into sleep with the ease of the unburdened. She envied him that. Envied his ability to close his eyes and simply stop, to trust that the world would keep turning without his vigilance. She pulled up the app. Front door camera. The porch sat empty under the motion light, the street beyond dark and still. 3:15 a.m. Nothing. 3:16 a.m. A car passed on the road at the edge of frame, taillights red smears in the darkness, gone in seconds. 3:17 a.m. They came out of the darkness like they'd been waiting there all along. 4 figures. Walking up the driveway in single file. Sarah watched, barely breathing, as they entered the motion light's range, and she could finally see them clearly. David, Sarah, Emma, Lucas. The entire family walking toward the house at 3:17 in the morning, while the real family slept in their beds. The other David led the way, moving with that familiar gait, wearing clothes Sarah didn't recognize, a dark jacket she'd never seen, pants that might have been jeans or might have been something else in the poor light. Behind him came the other Sarah, and seeing herself on camera was worse than seeing David, was somehow so much worse because she could see that the walk was right, the posture was right, everything was exactly as it should be except for the fact that she was looking at herself, and she was also lying in bed with her phone pressed to her face, watching herself approach her own front door. The other Emma and the other Lucas followed. The children, were they children? Could you call them that? Walked in perfect synchronization, each step landing at the same moment, like they were controlled by the same puppeteer. They reached the porch. The other David reached for the door. Sarah wanted to look away, wanted to close the app, wanted to wake her husband and show him and demand he explain. But she couldn't move. Could only watch as the other family, her other family, opened the front door and stepped inside. She switched to the hallway camera. Empty. Nothing there. Just like before. But this time she kept watching. 3:18 a.m. 3:19. 3:20. And then, at 3:23 they appeared. The other family stood in the hallway, all 4 of them, arranged in a line facing the camera. They weren't moving. Weren't speaking. Just standing there, utterly still, their faces blank, their eyes catching the night vision's infrared illumination in a way that made them seem to glow faintly silver. Sarah's hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. The other Sarah's head tilted slightly, like a dog hearing a distant sound. Like someone listening. The other David raised one hand, slowly, and pointed directly at the camera. Pointed at Sarah. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, and David jerked awake beside her, sitting up in confusion, asking what happened, what was wrong, was someone breaking in? Nothing, she heard herself say. Bad dream. Sorry. Go back to sleep. He hesitated, and for one terrible moment she thought he was going to press, going to ask more questions, going to make her show him the phone and the footage and the other versions of themselves standing in their hallway in the middle of the night. But he just nodded, squeezed her shoulder, lay back down. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out again. Sarah didn't move for a long time. Just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her heart pound. Eventually, she forced herself to get up, to retrieve the phone from where it had fallen. The screen was cracked now, a spiderweb of fractures across the glass, but the app was still open. The hallway camera showed nothing. Empty. So, she switched to the front door camera. Scrubbed back to 3:17 a.m. Watched them come again, the other family walking up the driveway, entering the house. They never left. She watched all the way until 6 a.m. The other family never appeared on the front door camera again. Never walked back out. Never went anywhere. They were still inside. Sarah deleted the footage. Then she deleted the app. Then she went to the bathroom and threw up as quietly as she could, and brushed her teeth and splashed water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her reflection looked exactly right. She had no way of knowing if that was reassuring or terrifying. Emma noticed first. She came downstairs for breakfast on a Thursday morning, still half asleep, reaching automatically for the cereal box on top of the refrigerator. It wasn't there. Where's the Cheerios? Sarah looked up from her coffee. David was already gone, some early meeting downtown, and Lucas was still in the shower, singing badly to music only he could hear. In the pantry. Where they always are. They're not always in the pantry. They're always on top of the fridge. Honey, I don't think so. We've always kept cereal in the... Mom? Emma's voice had sharpened, that teenage edge of frustration that usually preceded an argument about something trivial. I've been eating breakfast in this kitchen for 17 years. The cereal goes on top of the fridge. Dad puts it there because he says the pantry gets too humid and makes things stale. Sarah blinked. That did sound like something David would say. But when she tried to picture the Cheerios box on top of the refrigerator, the image felt wrong somehow. Like a word you've said too many times until it loses all meaning. Maybe your dad moved it? You can ask him when he gets home. Emma shot her a look but didn't push it. Just retrieved the cereal from the pantry, poured a bowl, and ate in pointed silence. Small things. That's how Sarah would describe it later if anyone ever asked. Small things that felt wrong but could be easily explained. The cereal box. The bathroom towels, which had apparently always been blue, even though Sarah could swear they'd bought the green ones specifically because they matched the shower curtain. The family photos on the mantel, rearranged in an order that made sense but wasn't the order Sarah remembered putting them in. Lucas complained that someone had been in his room moving things around. His desk chair faced the wrong direction. His collection of Lego sets had been subtly reorganized on the shelves. His closet door, which he always left open, had been closed. Maybe Emma was snooping, Sarah suggested, and Lucas accepted this explanation with the easy contempt of sibling rivalry, while Emma denied it with matching indignation. David noticed nothing. Or rather, David agreed with whatever version of reality seemed to be asserting itself. Yes, the cereal had always been in the pantry. Yes, the towels had always been blue. Yes, the photos were arranged correctly. What are you talking about? That's clearly where your mother put them. Sarah watched him when he wasn't looking. Watched him move through their house, their life, with perfect familiarity. Everything he did was exactly right. Every habit, every routine, every small gesture was precisely what she expected. Too precisely. She reinstalled the app. She didn't tell anyone. Kept her phone close, checked the footage obsessively, looking for, what? She didn't know. Looking for something wrong. Looking for proof that she wasn't imagining things, that reality was shifting around her in ways that shouldn't be possible. The footage showed nothing unusual. The family came and went through the front door at normal hours. The hallway showed normal traffic, normal movement, the ordinary chaos of 4 people sharing a space. Nothing at 3:17 a.m. Nothing unexplained. But Sarah knew what she had seen. Knew she had watched herself walk into this house in the middle of the night. Knew she had deleted footage of her own family standing in the hallway, staring at the camera, not moving, not breathing, just watching. She started leaving small tests. A thread across the hallway bathroom door to show if anyone entered while the family was asleep. Dust patterns on surfaces that shouldn't be disturbed. A specific arrangement of items on her dresser that only she would notice if changed. Every morning something was different. The thread was gone or had been moved. The dust patterns showed disturbances she couldn't explain. The items on her dresser were in the right places but the wrong orientations, as if someone had handled each one and put it back without quite understanding how they were supposed to sit. "You're not sleeping," David said one night, finding her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at her phone. This isn't healthy. I'm fine. You're watching the cameras again. You've been doing it for weeks. Sarah, talk to me. She looked at her husband, standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing the old college t-shirt he slept in, his hair mussed from bed. He looked exactly like David. Sounded exactly like David. Every micro-expression, every inflection, every tiny detail was perfect. Do you remember our first apartment? He smiled, a little confused by the sudden shift. Of course. That awful place on Elm Street with the radiator that screamed. What color was the couch? Brown. That ugly brown thing we found on the curb. You wanted to throw it out, but I insisted we could fix it up. It was the right answer. Sarah could picture it clearly, the brown couch, the broken spring in the middle cushion, the way David had tried to repair it with duct tape and determination. But she could also picture a blue couch. Could remember arguing about the color at a furniture store that might or might not have existed. Could feel the ghost of a different memory, a parallel track that led somewhere else entirely. Go back to bed, she said. I'll be up soon. He hesitated, concern clear on his face, but he didn't push. Just nodded and retreated upstairs, leaving her alone with her phone and her doubt. Sarah pulled up the live feed. Front door camera. The porch sat empty, the motion light dark, the street beyond quiet and still. She checked the timestamp. 2:47 a.m. 30 minutes until 3:17. She waited. She was awake when they came. 3:17 a.m. Sarah lay in bed with her eyes open, phone clutched to her chest, watching the front door camera on the cracked screen. David slept beside her, his breathing deep and even, undisturbed by her vigilance. They emerged from the darkness at the edge of the frame just as they had before. 4 figures. Walking in single file. Coming home. But tonight Sarah had a plan. She slipped out of bed as the other family reached the porch. Moved silently down the hall, past Emma's door, past Lucas's door to the top of the stairs. From here she could see the front door below. Could see the hallway where the other family should appear if the footage was real, if any of this was actually happening. The front door opened. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Watched through the banister rails as the other David stepped inside, followed by the other Sarah, the other Emma, the other Lucas. 4 figures entering the house in silence, their movements synchronized, their faces blank. They were real. They were here. They were standing in her hallway and she was watching them, and this was happening. The other Sarah stopped. Tilted her head slightly, in that same listening gesture Sarah had seen on the footage. Then slowly she turned and looked directly up the stairs. Their eyes met. Sarah couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Could only stand there, frozen, as her other self stared up at her with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger or might have been something else entirely, something that didn't have a name in any language Sarah knew. The other Sarah smiled. It was Sarah's smile. The exact curve of lips she saw in the mirror every day. But stretched too wide, held too long, like someone who had learned to smile by reading about it but never actually felt the impulse. The other family began to climb the stairs. They moved slowly, deliberately, each step precise and measured. The other David led the way, the other Sarah behind him, the other children bringing up the rear. They didn't speak. Didn't make any sound at all, actually. Their feet on the stairs were silent, impossibly silent, like they had no weight at all. Sarah ran. She didn't think about where she was going. Just turned and fled down the hall, away from the stairs, away from the things that wore her family's faces. She reached the master bedroom, slammed the door behind her, locked it with shaking hands. David. She shook her husband hard enough to hurt. David, wake up, they're here, they're in the house. He didn't wake up. She shook him harder. Slapped his face. Screamed his name directly into his ear. Nothing. His eyes stayed closed, his breathing stayed even, his body stayed limp and unresponsive. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she registered that Emma and Lucas weren't making any noise either, weren't responding to her screaming, weren't coming to see what was wrong. The door handle turned. Slowly. Testing. Sarah backed away from it, backing into the corner of the room, looking around wildly for something, anything, some weapon or escape or miracle that could save her from what was on the other side of that door. The lock held. For now. A sound from outside the door. Not words exactly. A hum maybe. A frequency that Sarah felt in her bones more than heard in her ears. It made her teeth ache. Made her eyes water. Made something in the back of her skull light up with ancient, primal terror, the fear of the prey animal who has finally been cornered. Then silence. Sarah didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just waited, pressed into the corner, watching the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for them to come through. Minutes passed. Hours. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except the door and her own heartbeat and the awful certainty that they were still out there, still waiting, still smiling with too many teeth. Dawn came gradually, gray light seeping through the curtains, and with it came sound. Movement. David stirring in the bed, making that particular waking up grunt he always made, sitting up and stretching and looking around the room with sleepy confusion. Sarah? Why are you in the corner? What's wrong? She stared at him. At her husband, awake and normal and exactly right. The door, she managed. Did anyone come to the door? What? No. What are you talking about? She forced herself to move. To walk to the bedroom door. To unlock it with trembling hands and pull it open. The hallway was empty. Lucas's door was closed. Emma's door was closed. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as it had been when she'd gone to bed last night. No sign that anyone had been there, no evidence of the other family climbing the stairs toward her. She checked the cameras. The footage showed nothing. Just the house sitting quiet and still, her family sleeping in their beds, no figures on the porch at 3:17 a.m., no entry, no ascent up the stairs. According to the recording, she had been in bed all night. According to the recording, she had never gotten up, never fled to the corner, never locked herself in the bedroom. But she knew what she had seen, what she had heard, what she had felt. And she knew with terrible certainty that whatever was happening, the cameras couldn't help her anymore. They had learned that she was watching. And they had adjusted. Sarah found the basement. She had lived in this house for 12 years and had walked past the basement door 10,000 times without ever really thinking about it. Just a door at the end of the hallway, leading to a space they used for storage, for the water heater, for the accumulated detritus of family life. David had mentioned renovating it once, turning it into a game room or a home theater, but the project had never materialized. Now she stood in front of the door at 3:45 a.m., listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. It had started as a feeling. A pulling sensation like a fishhook buried somewhere in her chest, tugging her toward this particular place. She'd been lying in bed, pretending to sleep, when the urge became impossible to ignore. Her body moved without her permission, sliding out from under the covers, walking down the stairs, coming to stand before this door. The sounds were faint, almost too quiet to hear. Like whispers from another room. Like fingers tapping on glass. Like her own name, spoken over and over in voices that were almost familiar. She reached for the door handle. A hand closed on her shoulder. Sarah spun around. The thing that looked like David stood behind her, close enough that she could see the pores on its skin, the individual hairs of its eyebrows, the tiny capillaries in its eyes. It was a perfect reproduction. Flawless. But the eyes were wrong. Too still. Too focused. Looking at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You shouldn't be down here, it said in David's voice. You should be sleeping. What's in the basement? Nothing important. Its hand tightened on her shoulder. Just slightly. Just enough. Come back to bed. What did you do to my family? The thing's expression didn't change. Didn't flicker. Just kept looking at her with those two still eyes, that too perfect face. We are your family, it said. We've always been your family. Don't you remember? And the terrible thing was, part of her did remember. Part of her recalled moments that had never happened, conversations that had never occurred, a lifetime lived with these things that looked like her husband and children. Memories that felt just as real as her own, pressing against the inside of her skull, trying to overwrite what she knew to be true. No, she whispered. No, you're not. You're something else. We're better, the thing said, and for the first time its mask slipped. Its smile stretched too wide. Its eyes caught the hallway light and reflected it back wrong, silver instead of brown, sharp instead of soft. We're what you should have been. What you could have been. We're the family you deserve. Sarah shoved past it. Grabbed the basement door handle. Pulled. It didn't open. She pulled harder. Threw her weight against it. Screamed and yanked and slammed her shoulder into the wood until it splintered and cracked. The thing watched her. Made no move to stop her. Just stood there, smiling that too wide smile, as if this was exactly what it had expected. As if this was all part of some larger plan she couldn't see. The door gave way. Darkness spilled out like water, thick and heavy and wrong. Sarah could feel it against her skin, a pressure that wasn't quite physical, a presence that seemed to push back against the light. And from somewhere in that darkness she heard them. Her family. Calling her name. She ran down the stairs. Ran into the dark without thinking, without planning, without any instinct except the need to find them, to reach them, to bring them back. The darkness swallowed her. And then she was standing in the kitchen. Morning light poured through the windows. Coffee was brewing on the counter, its familiar smell filling the air. Emma and Lucas sat at the table eating cereal, arguing about something trivial. David was reading the newspaper, making his usual commentary about politics and weather. Everything was exactly as it should be. "Morning, sleepyhead," David said, looking up from the paper. "You were out cold. Didn't even wake up when I left for my run." Sarah stared at him. At all of them. At her family sitting in their kitchen, living their normal lives. "The basement," she heard herself say. "I went to the basement." Emma and Lucas exchanged glances. The kind of glances that meant Mom is being weird again. "We don't have a basement," David said, folding his paper. "Honey, are you feeling okay? You've been saying strange things lately." Sarah turned and looked down the hallway. The basement door was gone. Just a blank wall where it had been, painted the same beige as the rest of the hall, as if the door had never existed, as if she had imagined the whole thing. "I don't." She pressed her hand to the wall. Felt only plaster, cool and smooth and solid. "There was a door. Right here. You know there was a door." "There's never been a door there," David said, gentle now, concerned. "Maybe we should call Dr. Harrison. Schedule an appointment. You've been under a lot of stress lately." Sarah didn't answer. Just stood there, touching the wall where the door should have been, listening to her family continue their breakfast conversation behind her. Her family. Or the things that had replaced them. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. And she realized, with a horror that went all the way down to her bones, that maybe that was the point. Maybe that had always been the point. The security camera footage that leaked online would eventually be viewed 847 million times. The source was never identified. Some claimed it came from cloud storage that the Mercer family had forgotten to secure. Others said it was retrieved from a server that should have been empty. A few insisted it was fabricated, a viral marketing stunt for a movie that never materialized, though no studio ever claimed responsibility. The footage begins at 3:17 a.m. The house sits quiet and still, captured from 6 angles: front door, back door, garage, living room, hallway, and what the timestamps identify as a bedroom camera that the family never installed. For the first few seconds nothing happens. Just the ordinary stillness of a sleeping home, the kind of footage that accumulates by the terabyte in security systems around the world. Then the front door opens. They come in single file just as they always have. A man, a woman, a teenage girl, a younger boy. A family coming home though the house is already occupied. They move with that same synchronized precision, that same impossible silence, their faces blank and their eyes catching the infrared light like small silver mirrors. But this time the cameras show something new. As the other family crosses the threshold, the living room camera captures movement. The real David Mercer sitting on the couch in the dark, waiting. He has a gun. He raises it. He fires. The bullet passes through the other David without effect. No wound. No reaction. Just a small hole in the wall behind him that seals itself within seconds, the plaster flowing back together like water finding its level. The other family doesn't stop. Doesn't slow. Just keeps moving forward into the house toward the stairs. The real David fires again. And again. Emptying the magazine into figures that barely seem to notice, that absorb each impact without acknowledgement, that continue their relentless advance. The bedroom camera shows Sarah sitting up in bed, watching the other family enter the room. Shows her screaming something though the audio. No one talks about the audio. It's the reason the footage was taken down within hours of its first upload, the reason copies keep getting flagged and removed, the reason anyone who watches the original reports nightmares for weeks afterward. It isn't words. It isn't any sound that human vocal cords should be able to produce. It's something else. Something that seems to come from inside your skull rather than through your ears, that makes you understand exactly what the other family is without being able to explain it, that makes you know things about the universe that no one should ever have to know. The footage shows the two families meeting in the hallway. The real and the other face to face, mirror images separated by whatever vast distance exists between what is and what shouldn't be. The other family extends their hands. The real family takes them. The footage ends at 3:23 a.m. When police conducted a welfare check 3 days later, responding to concerned calls from neighbors who hadn't seen the Mercers in days, they found the house empty. No furniture. No personal belongings. No evidence that anyone had ever lived there at all. Just a security system, still recording, its cameras pointed at blank walls and empty rooms. And on the front porch, clearly visible in the footage that the responding officers would later claim to have never seen, 4 figures standing in a line. Waiting. Smiling. looking directly at the camera with eyes that reflected light wrong, with expressions that were almost human, with the patient stillness of things that have learned to wear faces and are very, very good at it now. The house was demolished 6 months later. The land remains vacant. No one has ever built there again. But sometimes, in the small hours of the morning, people driving past claim to see lights in the windows of a house that doesn't exist. They claim to see figures moving behind curtains that were torn down years ago. They claim to hear something, not quite voices, not quite music, something else entirely, drifting across the empty lot. And if they look closely, if they look at just the right angle at just the right time, they claim to see a family. Father, mother, daughter, son. Coming home. The security cameras are still recording. They've always been recording. And somewhere, in some server that no one maintains, in some cloud that no one owns, the footage keeps accumulating. Hour after hour. Day after day. Year after year. Waiting for someone to watch. Waiting for someone to see. Waiting for someone to recognize themselves. The watchers will stream exclusively on platform this Halloween season. Watch them come home. Watch them stay. Watch yourself.